My daughter Lily's university convocation was supposed to be the proudest night of our family's life. 4 years of her working 2 part-time jobs, surviving on instant noodles and sheer stubbornness, finally walking across that stage at Ryerson with her business degree. I had booked a private dining room at a restaurant in downtown Toronto months in advance. 12 seats. 12 people who actually showed up for her. Instead, it became the night my brother-in-law looked me dead in the eye, leaned back in his chair like he owned the table, and announced to a group of strangers that I would be picking up the tab. I kept my hands flat on the white tablecloth. I did not blink. I work in corporate compliance for a mid-size financial firm here in Toronto. My entire job is paper trails, audit logs, documentation. When something goes wrong in a multi-million-dollar transaction, I am the one who finds the exact timestamp, the exact signature, the exact moment someone crossed the line. I have spent 12 years building a reputation on being the person in the room who never panics, who always has the receipts. The most exhausting case I have ever managed was not a rogue fund manager or a falsified expense report. It was my brother-in-law, Kevin's brother, Brendan. Brendan is 47 years old. He has the handshake of a man who wants you to know he once had money, and the financial history of someone who absolutely does not anymore. He drifts between cities, between schemes, between the patience of whoever in the family has not yet cut him off. For the past 3 years since he moved back to the GTA, that person has been us. Not because my husband Owen asked me to, because Brendan is the kind of man who makes himself impossible to ignore and possible to resent only in hindsight. Last Christmas, he borrowed $1,100 from our joint account. Owen had co-signed a short-term loan, he said, just to tide Brendan over. Emergency. He had found a contracting gig up in Barrie and needed to cover the first week before the paychecks started. I found out when I logged into online banking and saw the transfer. Owen looked at his shoes when I asked. He said Brendan had promised to pay it back within a month. I want you to understand that that money never came back. Not a dollar. Not a word. And when I brought it up at Easter, Brendan laughed and said Owen had called it a gift. Owen did not correct him. My in-laws nodded along and told me to let it go. Family is family, my mother-in-law said over her ham. She said it the way people say grace, automatic, practiced, meaning nothing except that the conversation was now over. I let it go. I smiled and passed the scalloped potatoes, but I kept the transfer records. Brendan did not crash Lily's convocation dinner alone. He arrived 40 minutes late with 2 men I had never seen in my life. He introduced them as colleagues from a real estate investment group he was supposedly launching. Their names slid right off me. What I noticed was that neither of them looked like they were there to celebrate my daughter. They looked like men who had been promised a free meal and shown up accordingly. Lily was already seated when they walked in. She was wearing the navy dress she had bought herself with her last shift at the coffee shop, where she had worked all 4 years of her degree. Her hair was up. She looked beautiful and nervous and so genuinely happy that it physically hurt to watch Brendan walk past her without saying a word to her. He found his seat, the one I had not assigned to him because he had not been invited, pulled it out, and dropped into it like he had been there the whole time. My mother-in-law was at the far end of the table. She caught my eye. I saw the flicker cross her face. That small, practiced apology she makes with her expression when Brendan does something she has no intention of stopping. The server came around for drink orders. Brendan did not look at the menu. He looked at me. "We'll do a bottle of the Okanagan Pinot to start," he said, waving at the table like he was the host. "And bring another for their end." He nodded toward his 2 colleagues. "She's celebrating. She can cover it." I felt my husband's hand tighten on my knee under the table. The bottle was $68. I knew because I had reviewed the menu 16 times planning this dinner. I knew every price. I had budgeted carefully because a private room in downtown Toronto on a Friday night in June is not cheap, and I had wanted to do this properly. For Lily, Not for whatever performance Brendan was currently staging. Lily smiled politely. She had grown up watching me smooth things over. She assumed I would do it again. I excused myself from the table. My mother-in-law was faster. She caught me in the corridor outside the private room, near the host stand, before I had even reached the server. Her hand wrapped around my forearm. "Just let him have tonight," she said quietly. Her voice was low and urgent. "He's been having a hard time. You know how he is. It's Lily's night. Don't make it a thing." I looked at her. I had heard this sentence, or a version of it, more times than I could count. Don't make it a thing. Let it go. It's not worth it. You know how he is. Every single time, the request was the same: absorb the cost. Absorb it financially, absorb it emotionally, absorb it quietly, and do not, under any circumstances, let the discomfort land on the person who caused it. You use the word family every time you want me to pay for his mistakes, I said. I kept my voice completely level. Lily worked 3,000 hours at a coffee shop to be here tonight. I am not funding his sales pitch over her convocation dinner. My mother-in-law opened her mouth. I was already walking toward the maître d'hôtel. His name was Sebastian. I had spoken to him twice during the booking process and once by email to confirm the menu. He knew my name, he knew the reservation, he knew the firm I worked for because I had routed 3 client dinners through his restaurant in the past 2 years. I did not need to explain much. The 3 guests who came in late, I said. Separate check. Do not add anything from their end to my account. If there is any attempt to transfer charges, I need you to decline it and come to me directly. Sebastian gave me a very small, very professional nod. He understood. I went back to the table. Brendan was telling one of his colleagues about a property development opportunity in Vaughan. The bottle of Pinot had been opened. Lily was talking to her actual friends at the other end of the table, laughing about something her roommate had said at the ceremony. Owen was very carefully looking at his bread plate. I sat down. I picked up my glass of water. I let the evening continue. Brendan ordered confidently. He ordered the way men who are not paying for things order. Appetizers he did not share. A ribeye, a second glass from a new bottle he requested mid-dinner, pointing at a different wine on the list without asking the price. His colleagues followed his lead. The bill they were quietly running up was not my problem anymore. They just did not know that yet. At 9:45, Sebastian brought the checks. Ours came to our end of the table, neatly itemized. Lily's meal, Owen's, mine, her friends, her aunt and uncle who had driven in from Mississauga, her former professor who had mentored her through her final year. Reasonable. Accounted for. Exactly what I had planned. The other check landed in front of Brendan. He looked at it the way people look at something they were certain would not happen. He laughed first. That short, dismissive laugh men like Brendan used to buy time. He said there had been a mistake. He told the server it was supposed to be one bill. The server smiled politely and said he was sorry for any confusion, but the reservation had specified separate accounts from the start. Brendan looked at me. I looked at Lily, who was opening the small gift her aunt had brought her. He pulled out his wallet. He laid down a credit card with the particular confidence of someone who is not entirely sure it's going to work. The server ran it quietly at the terminal near the host stand. He came back. He said he was sorry, but the card had been declined. The table had gotten quieter than Brendan would have liked. He said it was a technical issue. He tried a second card, a different one, this one with a rewards logo on it. That one was declined before the server even made it back to the terminal. I know because I was watching Brendan's face, and I saw the moment the second card came back. His colleague, the taller one, looked at his phone, pushed his chair back very slightly. The physical language of someone calculating how close to the exit he was. Brendan turned to Owen. "Bro," he said. Just that. One word. The whole negotiation in a single syllable. Owen looked at me. I said nothing. My expression said everything I needed it to. Owen looked back at his brother. I can't cover that, Brendan. The taller colleague stood up. He said something about getting some air. He did not come back. His friend lasted another 90 seconds before remembering in early morning. Within 4 minutes, Brendan was sitting alone at his end of the table with an unpaid bill and no audience. I stood up. I walked to where he was sitting. I looked at the empty wine glasses and the breadcrumbs and the plate that had held a $44 ribeye. Uninvited guests cover their own meals, I said. That's always been the rule. I turned back to Lily's end of the table. Her friend was filming her blowing out the single candle on the small cake the restaurant had brought out. She was laughing. Genuinely laughing. The kind of laugh she has when she is not performing happiness for anyone. Sebastian handled the rest. Brendan attempted to argue at the host stand. He tried calling it a misunderstanding. He tried invoking our last name, which did not carry the weight he assumed it would. Sebastian presented him with a very clear set of options, politely and without drama. Brendan eventually surrendered his ID and signed a payment agreement to return within 48 hours, with the full amount in certified funds or by Interac. The amount was $312. The story should have ended there. 2 days later, Owen's mother called me at 7 in the morning. Her voice was the particular pitch she uses when she wants me to fix something before Owen wakes up and finds out. She told me Brendan had been calling her all night. She said he needed the $312 to clear the restaurant debt, and also that he knew I kept a float of business petty cash at the house for client reimbursements because he had heard Owen mention it once at Thanksgiving. I set my coffee mug down very carefully. He knows I keep cash at the house, I repeated. She said he was just in a tight spot. She said it was just a loan. How did he know about the cash, I asked, specifically. She did not answer that the way I wanted her to. I thanked her, said I would look into it, and hung up. Then, I called my home security monitoring company. I had installed the system 2 winters ago after a break-in 2 streets over. Motion sensors on the back porch and garage, camera at the front door and one covering the kitchen entrance from the carport, all of it backed up to cloud storage with timestamps. I pulled up the feed from that morning on my laptop. Brendan had been there at 6:42 a.m., not knocking. He had come around the side of the house through the carport, tried the side door into the mudroom, found it locked, and then spent approximately 4 minutes at the back porch door. The camera had caught his face clearly. Caught him trying to work something thin and flat into the doorframe. Caught him giving up, walking back to a car idling on the street and leaving. My hands were steady when I called Owen into the kitchen and showed him the footage. He watched the timestamp. He watched his brother's face in high definition trying to break into our home. He did not say anything for a very long time. Then I called the non-emergency police line and filed a report. I had the footage. I had the timestamp. I had the signed payment agreement from the restaurant, showing financial motive. The officer I spoke to was thorough. She told me this constituted attempted break and enter, and that given the documented pattern they would be following up. They did. Brendan had also, it turned out, missed his 48-hour window at the restaurant. Sebastian, true to form, had already escalated. The restaurant filed their own report for non-payment. 2 separate incidents, documented, time-stamped, filed within the same week. Brendan spent a weekend in a holding cell. He was eventually offered a conditional discharge with 12 months of probation, 80 hours of community service, and mandatory repayment of the restaurant debt, plus a victim surcharge. He had to appear before the court. He had to admit what he had done. The 2 colleagues from the real estate investment group, whatever that had actually been, were nowhere to be found when his name appeared in the provincial court records. That is the thing about men who perform wealth for an audience. The audience leaves the moment the performance stops being useful to them. Owen's mother stopped calling me the particular way she used to. The early morning calls where she manages me on Brendan's behalf, they simply stopped. Owen had a long conversation with her that I was not present for, and came home quieter and more clear-eyed than I had seen him in years. Owen and I are still together. That matters, to say plainly. He is not Brendan. He has spent a long time in proximity to someone who treats other people's resources as available by default, and that has costs. Slow costs that build up over time in ways you don't always notice until you look at the account history. We are working on it. We are honest about it now in a way we were not before that night. Lily came home for Thanksgiving in October. She helped me make the cranberry sauce from scratch because that is the thing we always do together, and we stood at the kitchen counter and she said, without looking up from the pot, "I'm really glad you didn't just pay for it, Mum." I said, "Me too." Neither of us said anything else about it. We do not have Brendan at our table anymore. That is not a punishment I handed down. It is a boundary I named finally out loud to Owen and to his mother, with the same steadiness I use at work when I tell a department head that the audit findings are what they are, and no amount of discussion will change the numbers. The $1,100 from last Christmas is in a TFSA I opened for Lily in January. I calculated what it would be worth at her 35th birthday. The number is small, but it is hers. It is growing. It is not being spent on someone else's ribeye, or someone else's wine, or someone else's performance of a life he cannot actually afford. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being the person in the room who always absorbs. It does not feel like exhaustion at first. It feels like patience. It feels like being the bigger person. It feels for a very long time like love. But absorbing is not love. Absorbing is just slow damage, wearing a polite expression. The night of Lily's convocation, I did not absorb. I am still thinking about how long it took me to understand that those two things were different. If you have been the absorber in your family, the one who holds the bill, keeps the peace, swallows the cost so the dinner doesn't become a scene, I need you to hear this clearly. Protecting your resources is not being difficult. Naming what is happening is not making it a thing. Separate checks are not a punishment. They are just the truth of who ordered what. That is all I did that night. I told the truth of who ordered what, and I have not paid for a single thing of his since. I keep coming back to the image of Lily at the kitchen counter in October, stirring cranberry sauce and not looking at me when she said she was glad I hadn't paid for it. That is the moment I think about most. Not the declined cards, not the security footage, not Brendan's face at the host stand. Just my daughter, quietly relieved in our kitchen on an ordinary holiday afternoon. There is a cause and effect to how things like this unfold, and I do not think it is complicated or mysterious. Brendan spent years operating in a system where the consequences of his choices were absorbed by other people. Every time someone covered for him, every time the bill disappeared before he had to face it, every time the word family was used to redirect the discomfort back onto whoever he had borrowed from, he learned the same lesson: this works. Keep doing it. The system will hold. And it did hold for a long time because people like me kept holding it up. What I understand now is that absorbing someone else's consequences is not kindness. It looks like kindness from the outside. It feels like patience when you are in the middle of it. But what it actually does is protect the person causing harm from ever having to reckon with what they are doing. I was not helping Brendan by paying. I was helping him stay exactly who he was. The night I told Sebastian to run a separate check, I was not being petty. I was being honest. I was letting the math be what it actually was. That is what I have come to think of as the real work of integrity. Not the dramatic moments, not the confrontations, but the small decision to stop making the numbers lie. To stop letting the bill say something that is not true about who ordered what and who is responsible for what. What took me longer to understand is that it also required a kind of clarity I had to build deliberately over time. I had to know my own records. I had to keep the transfer documentation from the Christmas loan. I had to have spoken to Sebastian twice before that night, so that when I needed to say something to him quietly and quickly, he already understood who I was and what I was asking. That is not luck. That is the accumulation of paying attention, of being organized, of refusing to operate on the assumption that things will probably be fine. They are not always fine. Sometimes you need the footage. Sometimes you need the pine stamps. Being prepared is not paranoia. It is just what it looks like to take your own life seriously enough to protect it. And then there is Lily. 4 years of early shifts and instant noodles and showing up to every single one of her own obligations. She did not ask anyone to carry her through her degree. She built something real with her own actual hours, and she deserved a dinner that reflected that. Watching her that night, once we were downstairs and the cake was lit, and Brendan was someone else's problem, I thought about what it means to model something for your kids, not to lecture it, not to explain it, just to do it in front of them when it matters. The $1,100 is in her TFSA now. It is a small number, but it is honest. It did not come from swallowing something I should have named. It came from finally saying the thing clearly and letting the rest follow from there. That is all any of us can really do. Be honest about the numbers. Stay prepared. Show up for the people who actually earn their seat at the table.